Thank you very much, Conor. Thank you for that warm welcome. And of course, happy birthday to you, to Peter, and to the rest of the Sutton Trust on your 20th birthday. And congratulations on the huge impact that you've had over the last 20 years. How is it that Peter described social mobility 20 years ago, something about community-funded electric scooters for the elderly? That's how it was defined by the House of Commons 20 years ago. And today, at the 20th anniversary, we have the Secretary of State saying it is her single guiding core mission for the Department of Education. So what an impact the Sutton Trust has had, and congratulations to you on that. And we at BCG are very proud to have played a small part in that. We've been working with the Sutton Trust for the last 10 years, supporting them on specific pieces of research, on campaigns, in designing certain programs, and in occasionally reviewing their strategy. And it was about a year ago that Conor and Lee and Peter said, with a view to the 20th anniversary, that it would be useful if perhaps we at BCG could try and assemble the various bodies of research on social mobility in the UK, and to try and articulate a view as to where social mobility is today in the UK and what its prospects are going forward. So I start with a chart, and this is not a chart of Donald Trump's approval rating, nor is it a chart of the accuracy of UK pollsters. It is in fact a chart of social mobility over the last 80 years in the UK. And just to explain the key here, because when we look at the research on social mobility, there are really multiple types of mobility. So we make a distinction between income mobility, the degree to which, as an adult child, your income is better or worse than your parents' income, but also social class mobility, which essentially classifies occupations into different categories and ranks them based on prestige, on income, on the education required to achieve those classes. And then on top of that, there's both absolute and relative mobility. Absolute mobility, how you've changed since your parents. Relative mobility, how you perform versus society. And so this looks at all of those trends over the last 80 years and essentially tries to index them. And what you can see is for a long period of time, from 1940 all the way through to the mid-1980s, all of this was trending upwards. We had 40 years of broad-based economic growth. We had structural change and investment in the economy. We had the emergence of the managerial and the professional sectors. And so year on year, generation on generation, we saw average weekly pay increase during that period of time. But then we did indeed hit a tipping point in the mid-1980s. And what you see is actually the social class mobility has essentially plateaued. That's those top two lines. So it's more or less stayed static and held those gains, whereas income mobility, but measured both through absolute and relative terms, has declined. We've seen the growth in professional and managerial jobs slow. We've seen regional disparities emerge across the UK, and clearly that's then been compounded by the financial crisis of 2007-8 and by some of the recent political uncertainty. And so I think that really does begin to bring to life the social mobility emergency, as Justine Greening called it today, the fact that we're not necessarily seeing that trend of increased income mobility continue. When we look at the research and we look at what's driving all of this, and we try and summarize, vast quantities of research onto a single page, this is our attempt to try and outline what the drivers of improved social mobility are. And you can see that we broadly lay out these three categories. So one is, are there job opportunities in the economy? And that's clearly a function of economic growth, both the rate of economic growth, but also the shape of economic growth and the structure of the economy that's creating, and also the geographical dispersion and fairness of that economic growth. So are there job opportunities in the economy? Are we then equipping our students and our children with the skills to be able to avail of those job opportunities, which are both hard skills, literacy, numeracy, etc., but also the non-cognitive skills, the essential life skills that Peter described in his opening remarks, not just resilience and motivation, but also fluency, articulacy, confidence, etc. And are we providing the right influences so that those individuals are able to avail of the opportunities? And then finally, if there are opportunities in the economy, and if the individuals have the skills to avail of those opportunities, is there fairness of access both to education and to employment? Is it meritocratic, or are there biases in the admission and recruitment system? Is there an understanding of the opportunities that individuals can avail of? And are there positive influences from the networks and peer groups that surround those individuals? And clearly all of this is in the context of some underlying factors on the right-hand side, factors relating to infrastructure, relating to attitudes, relating to environment. And so when we look at what's driving social mobility, both positively and negatively, we look at this map of key drivers. And then just to share, I suppose, a couple of charts, and I'm sure there are people who are more expert than me in the room who'll be able to add to this. But I think we see a mixed picture in the UK. On the right-hand side, you do see some good improvements in educational mobility. It's already been referenced this morning, the positive moves over recent years. In London, we are seeing a closing of the gap when it comes to certain metrics of educational attainment between the top 20% and the bottom 20%. So there is good progress on educational mobility, but we're not necessarily seeing that flow through to income mobility on the left-hand side of the page, partly because of some of the systemic issues that I raised on the previous slide, but also partly affected by access, both access to education and access to employment. In terms of education, yes, there have been positive trends in terms of access of, for instance, state school children to Oxford universities, but it's not as broad-based as you might like to see. You don't necessarily see that cascade out to Russell Group universities. You don't necessarily see that reach down into the very poorest of the free school meal cohort. So while there has been some improvement in terms of educational access, there's more work to do. And then as far as access to employment is concerned, one interesting statistic just to share is if you look at the tax records of people in employment, and even those who've gone to the same university and studied the same degree, there is still a noticeable difference in terms of the earnings of those from high-income backgrounds versus low-income backgrounds. It's around a 10% difference, even if they've been to the same university and even if they've studied the same course. And that, we believe, is because essentially the better off classes are able to erect a glass floor below which their income will not fall. That is partly to do with the home environment from very early years onwards. It's partly to do with the additional support they're able to provide to their children through private tuition, through the positive reinforcement through their networks and peer groups, and through the essential life skills that get infused through that life journey. So there is still an issue in allowing those students, even if they've got access to the same course in the elite university, to get them through and have the same career chances. So that's, I suppose, looking backwards and trying to see where we are today. Peter and Connor and Lee also asked us to look forwards, to look at some of the trends that might impact social mobility either positively or negatively going forwards. And one that we wanted to just call out is the issue of automation. And so what we lay out here on a couple of slides are both the probability of automation, so we look at different types of occupations, and the probability that in the next few years these occupations will either be wholly or substantially changed through automation. And when you look at independent research, the Bank of England has suggested that there are 15 million jobs in the UK that may be wholly or partly impacted through automation. And clearly that creates both an opportunity, both a threat and an opportunity as far as social mobility is concerned. We've tried to break it down further by looking at these two axes. So on the horizontal axis, the degree to which a role is non-routine, it requires human intervention, specialist intervention, cognitive thinking, etc., versus the degree to which a task, a job is repetitive, it's high volume, it's what you might call routine. And then on the vertical axis, the degree to which a role is manual versus the degree to which it's cognitive. And broadly speaking, we believe that on the right-hand side, you'll see demand for these types of roles decreasing as a result of automation, and on the left-hand side, you'll see demand increasing. On the right-hand side, roles like, paralegals, paraprofessionals, they will be impacted, we believe, by the emergence of cloud-based accounting, smart contracts, other types of technologies. Roles like sales assistants, salespeople, customer service agents. There are 2.3 million people who have those types of jobs in the UK today. They will at least be impacted by the emergence of voice and image recognition, by natural language processing, by the ability to serve customers through IVR systems rather than through a human voice. The emergence of robotics on the bottom half of this page, the ability to roboticize repeatable manual tasks and indeed repeatable processing tasks. There are many banks in the UK today who are running through exercises of trying to identify those processes that are highly repeatable and that are high volume, and seeing whether they can build algorithms to essentially replicate what the humans are doing. So all of those roles on the right-hand side will be heavily impacted or indeed will be eliminated through automation. Whereas on the right-hand side, I think we'll see an increased demand for some of these types of roles, because clearly you still need to give steer and direction to automated technology. And so the skills that are required to do that, and the foundational skills that are required to enable that, the STEM skills that we teach in our schools, but also the essential life skills that allows you to operate in a more ambiguous environment, those will become crucial as the workforce and as the economy reshapes under automation. This was just one trend that we looked at as part of the work. We did look at a series of other trends, which is in the deeper research. So we looked at trends, for instance, around ubiquitous connectivity and the emergence of big data and advanced analytics. Ubiquitous connectivity, where people work, advanced analytics, what they're working on, new ways of working, the emergence of freelancing and the gig economy, how they're working, the demographic shifts and the aging of our society, how long they need to work for, and the increased trend of globalization, who they're working for. So all of those trends, we think, will have an impact on the shape of our economy, the types of jobs available on our economy, and all of that creates the context in which the future social mobility challenge needs to be addressed. It is a large list of challenges. It's just as well the UK government doesn't have any distractions at the moment and can really focus on that list. I think just one other chart on what we're seeing. We've called this the hollowing out of the UK workforce. If you look at the various different types of roles, and this is in descending order of median pay, and you look at the change in employment, the percentage change of those different roles, you see an increase in some of the managerial and professional roles on the left-hand side. You see some increase in some of the service activities on the right-hand side, but some of these repeatable routine roles in the middle, that's where we potentially see a hollowing out, and this is based on 10 years of data up until 2014. So all of this creates some challenges, we believe. It creates opportunities for winners and it creates opportunities for less fortunate outcomes. We think there is going to be a tension between high-skilled and low-skilled workers, as per the previous chart, and in particular, the ability to continuously learn and to continuously reinvent your skill set. If you look at what the half-life of skills are today, the Institute for Engineers have predicted or have estimated that the half-life for engineering skills in 1960 was 35 years. If you were taught engineering, if you were skilled in engineering, that would last you for 35 years, whereas now they say it's 5 years. So the ability to the need to continuously refresh your skills so that you're not just high skilled, but you're adaptably skilled on number one. The second trend here is what we call superstars versus everybody else. That as you have digital technology continuing to automate industries and also globalize those industries, it does create more of a winner-takes-all dynamic. And I think Ben referred to this when he spoke, that we're seeing income growth at the very top end really continuing to accelerate. And so that does create the possibility, indeed the threat, that individual people will be able to dominate certain industries or certain markets. And then finally, capital versus labour. This is well documented in the economic press, people like Thomas Piketty, etc. But we are seeing a trend away from the importance of labour and a trend towards the importance of capital in terms of being able to generate wealth and generate growth. And so we look at those and we think there's a lot to look on that page that's threatening to social mobility, but it's also possible to look at that and say there are opportunities. If skills are turning over every 5 years, there's opportunities for people from less privileged backgrounds to get onto that ladder. If digital technologies are transforming the way in which industries work, the way in which sectors work, there's a possibility for somebody to come from a non-standard background and be that disruptive superstar. So there are opportunities on this page rather than just threats. As we try to crystallize all this into, I suppose, a set of recommendations, we try to align a set of recommendations against the categories that we described, and much of this is about reinforcing and accelerating existing activities. But clearly a lot of this depends on economic growth. There's clearly challenges to economic growth in this country, and there's clearly uncertainty around it. But whatever can be done to support economic growth, and in particular high value job creation and geographically dispersed job creation, would be instructive. And then once you've addressed that, then trying to think about how you develop those and cultivate those individual capabilities. There's been a lot of talk today about teaching quality. Clearly that is important. There are issues that Peter's raised around essential life skills being part of the portfolio that needs to be addressed, vocational tracks needing to be strengthened, and we've published on this in the past, and also the increased study of STEM subjects. There is still a gap in this country, around 40,000 per annum in terms of those who are studying STEM subjects, and as you see on some of the previous slides, that continues to be an imperative going forward, and perhaps becomes an increased imperative going forward. And then in addition to developing individual capabilities, what more can be done to try and equalise the fairness of access both to employment and to education? We recommend here a common set of metrics around fair access. We also recommend further strengthening some of the internship and apprenticeship schemes. But I'd say undercutting all of this is this point about trying to encourage reskilling, upskilling, dynamic, lifelong learning, as the Secretary of State mentioned this morning. So they are just some thoughts from us looking outside in, really, at this sector, both in terms of where it is today, some of the challenges it faces, and maybe at least some of the recommendations that could help get it there. Thank you very much.